Pauli strings that can apply to an n-qubit state, and you have to search through the space for a set of these special Pauli strings that satisfy some given constraints and some additional constraints with each other. And so this is a sort of a fundamentally hard task that is quite immune to brute force, I would say. And already as I'm speaking, this is not even 3 weeks, I think, since we introduced the challenge, but our miners have already demonstrated their extreme ingenuity and broken through the problem and realized how to interact with the underlying quantum information and break the problem through cleverness. And so this is something that I've been really excited about, actually, because it demonstrates what our miners are capable of, what BitTensor is capable of, and it makes me really excited for the plans, I'll say, that we have for the future.
Totally. Yeah. And so maybe just to sort of restate that at like the, 10,000 foot level, you have this problem that's actually a super complex problem, but by carefully understanding how the problem is formulated and understanding also like outside research that's been done, you can sort of connect the two and turn this problem into something that actually is fairly straightforward to simulate to get the same answer. You can essentially pre-process the circuit and make it something that's fairly easy to simulate, even though the initial problem is, incredibly hard to simulate, which is quite innovative. And so maybe oh yeah, please.
I'm hoping that we're going to get to see some like statistics, or should I ask about that now? Because I would love to know, like, yeah, how well are we doing? How do we measure that?
Yeah, so in this particular case, because of the way that okay, so I think the way that this innovation was done, essentially it's become unbounded. So essentially it transforms all of these gate operations into gate operations that are very easily simulatable. And you could potentially go up to thousands of qubits with it. Now, that's not a universal pre-processing solution. It's, essentially because of the nature of the circuit. But what it demonstrates is that instead of people just figuring out how to scale a simulator, which is what they're trying to do with the peaked circuits, they also took it from a different angle, which was to say, can I actually understand what the circuit's doing, analyze the circuit, and then write a step that sort of does the same thing in an easier to execute way. And so once that was discovered, it essentially became unbounded to the point where, H-stab circuits have now been disincentivized and will be retired. Essentially it goes in the Hall of Fame because the community was innovative, which is great.
Wait, so before you took this problem to BitTensor, had this solution been discovered in the industry?
Will, I would say pieces of it, right? I would say that this was the combination of pieces, but no, I don't think. I don't know that I've had somebody put all of the pieces together yet. Will, you would know this better than me.
Oh yeah, so like when we were sort of going through the steps and designing this problem, it's sort of a well-known fact that this restricted regime, has all these theoretical advantages. But as far as what we were doing, designing the problem, we sort of could make a good guess that there was some nice strategy to be found. But as far as we knew, there was no strategy that already existed. So this is an example of our miners coming up with something new that worked for them.
And like in the industry, is this something that is benchmarked, like, or is this something that can be written about in terms of a paper and say like, hey, this is quite novel. Look, they did this. This hasn't been done before, and this is valuable not just to you guys in your subnet, but also across the field.
Yeah, certainly there's a potential. Of course, we don't know exactly what our miners are doing. We only know that they've solved it very quickly. What we have currently actually is sort of the reservation of a nice pot bonus for anyone who comes forward and kind of releases their solution by the time that we retire the circuit. So potentially, when we can, get in touch with whoever comes forward and claims the pot, we can work together with them and try to publish their results.
Have you guys looked at actually moving from what I'll call black box, so the miners optimize sort of behind their APIs, to something that forces them to submit these algorithmic innovations and share them in order to be rewarded? White box.
We would
Yeah.
love that. So that was, I mean, honestly, when we launched, one of my biggest concerns is that people wouldn't share because they would be essentially incentivized to hold on to the secret for as long as possible. So, I would love to pick your brain, Crux, on like ways to do that. Right now, the best way we could come up with was following a pattern that we've sort of discovered, which was to create an incentive pool where we basically hold, some of our alpha back and then offer it as a bounty to publish. But if you have other ways of accomplishing that, I'd love to chat about it.
Well, I mean, I won't claim to be the expert on it. I know there's other subnets that are they're deploying that to great effect in other domains. I think a bounty is an interesting way of doing it, but I mean, if you put it, front and center of what the miners have to do is they have to innovate, and then they have to share it. They have to publish it in some way that you guys can get your hands on in order to be even considered. There's a path that exists there. I would say that's
Yeah.
already been quite well established in BitTensor, and I think that it would be super powerful for you guys to be able to publish what you're finding the miners are coming up with. And it sounds like it would be really useful to the research community and in industry.
Yeah, and I see some of the community here piping in that Ridges does this, 62 does it. No, and I mean, we're big fans of not reinventing the wheel. In fact, we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about what's coming up next too, which is essentially drawing inspiration from some of the other great subnets that we've seen and sort of applying some of those to sort of forward-looking quantum use cases. But yeah, we'll definitely take a look at Ridges to look at how they incentivize the opening of this, because I mean the democratization and the progress within quantum, really is a huge part of why we originally came. And so I saw just another funny thing. I had the pleasure, because Will's been covering the presentation so much, of seeing a fun question from Mark Jeffries too, that said, "How soon can I use subnet 63 to break shores and steal everyone's Bitcoin?" So yeah, you might have seen on that giant chart from DARPA. Actually, hold on, let's go back to it real quick. I'll show you kind of roughly where that is. And then we'll come back. Oh man, look at all those animations. All right. Man, it's a little hard to see because our designer pulled the color out of this, but that little guy right there is 2048-bit RSA. And so you'll be able to find papers of sort of like, people are always advancing how to do shores in more efficient ways, taking less quantum operations, fewer qubits, and you can find papers on that, but it's pretty big. It's a pretty far ways off. And one of the cool things about it is that, again, if you sort of say quantum computers are getting better, algorithms are getting better, one of the best things to do is to sort of do that in the light so everybody can see it. And so as progress is being made on this, I think, the entire world is kind of carefully watching it. Now, I do think, oddly, the crypto world, who should probably be the most concerned about it, seems to be like the least loud about it, but yeah, eventually that time will come. And catching back up to where we are.
Yeah. Can you keep us ahead of the curve there?
We can. Yeah, we can. And yeah, we absolutely will. In fact, so I was going to sort of not put a name on this next slide here, but I'm going to put a name anyway, which is, okay, so we put out peak circuits. That's still going strong. Those are super hard. The community is making nice, slow, steady progress. They made short work of the HSTAB circuits. And so obviously we have more circuits coming. We weren't going to say what the next one is. I've got it all blurred out here, but I have the original author's photo behind it. But I will say the circuit that is on deck for 63 is actually intended to be a Shores circuit. And so the miners essentially will be incentivized to try to go larger and larger in terms of what they can break there. Now, this won't actually be the way to break, crypto or to break encryption, but this is a way to basically figure out how you can scale using Shores as the test bed for it. Now, this is still in this synthetic, as Crux had said, sort of stage of quantum, and we are still moving towards that organic stage of quantum. But this will make for, we're hoping, a nice, exciting challenge for miners to sink their teeth into as we continue the evolution of the roadmap. And so, this has been moving at a breakneck pace. We were introduced to BitTensor like in May, late May. And we were introduced by some folks that were in town and were happy to transfer a subnet to us for the right price. And so we bought one on June 18th. We launched on, we launched the white paper for peaked circuits on June 30th and put the subnet out on July 8th. By July 16th, you guys had already scaled up to 36 qubits, which we knew you could get to, but I was surprised how quick you got to it. By July 26th, made it up to 37 qubits. Now, it doesn't sound like a big thing, but especially using state vector methods of simulation, which, from all evidence we can find, people have to do for peak circuits so far, for the complexity of peak circuits we're producing. So 37 is actually requires 2x the computational resources as 36, so that's pretty big. We quickly launched HSTAB because you guys were making too fast of progress on peaked circuits, and they're very hard to generate. And again, by August 12th, you guys had solved that completely, which is an incredibly impressive feat. So today we're on Novelty Search, and we're excited to kind of announce the next big thing. So, if anybody thought that Shores circuit was the next big thing, that's actually the next small thing. That's kind of the regular cadence of kind of maintenance on 63. And so before we announce the next big thing, we want to go back to vision, just recognizing that not everybody had the, had read up on this ahead of time. And so we set off with the vision to make quantum computing available to everybody. And if you say, let's work back from that, how do we get to quantum computing for everyone? Well, you have to have free access to quantum, which means you have to have an open quantum marketplace, which means you need to have real quantum end users. You have to have miners who are running QPUs. That's like real quantum computers, right? Those incredibly expensive resources. You need miners running simulations too, because 90% of what's done today, that's probably a low ball estimate. More than 90% of all quantum execution happens in simulators today. So we need to be able to do that. But in order to get quantum end users, we need a quantum company, like a legitimate quantum company. And we need financials that work so that a quantum company can actually buy into this, feed data into the open quantum marketplace. And the open quantum marketplace can survive without running out of money. Okay, so it's starting to get complicated, but bear with me. In order for miners to be running simulations, they have to be comfortable with quantum, which is why we need them running on synthetics to get started. And most importantly, we need proof of compute for quantum, which doesn't exist yet, but we have a first version of it. And we're continuing to refine it. And we have to have the ability to do cost estimation so that as quantum circuits are coming in, we can actually understand in a very accurate way how should this be, and therefore how big should the reward be to miners who simulate it. And so when we outlined our roadmap, our original roadmap was to create these, again, I love the term synthetics. The first is a very narrow set of synthetics that are provable. And this allowed for experimentation in the community, for them to get oriented with quantum, for them to come up to speed. The second was to get into synthesized problems, what we called. So this was very small, controlled versions of real problems. But in order to do this, we have to have proof of compute, and we have to have dynamic scoring. And then ultimately to get to an open quantum platform. Now, we've been so excited with how fast things are moving. And we've learned a lot about how the incentives work and how people try to work with the incentives, work around the incentives, how the different types of incentives attract different types of miners. And we sort of looked at this and we said, hey, this proof of compute thing, we really need to get that good. If we don't get that good, then people are going to be cheating. And this dynamic scoring, again, if somebody gets something and we had it rated as a very low score and it took infinite amount of compute, that sucks. So we need to get that right. And we also recognize that we were incentivizing innovators. And we've been really amassing a lot of innovators on 63. And ultimately, we're going to be innovating, or we're going to be incentivizing operators at phase 3. And so we said, okay, well, let's just take a fresh look at this. What if phase 3 actually became phase 2? And we started with real quantum computers first. Because despite how we believe that the future is decentralized, the truth is that real quantum computers are very few and far between. So we can actually ping those platforms to confirm that circuits were executed. That means that synthesized problems becomes phase 3, and we can continue to keep an innovation ecosystem alive, driving continuous innovation that feeds into this execution environment as new quantum backends. So it doesn't end. The innovation doesn't end. It doesn't switch to operation. We have innovation and operation. And over time, we bring on additional QPUs. And once proof of compute is bomb, we bring on simulation, and we let everybody bring their HPC to put jet fuel on the scientific community and really tear this thing open. And so it's with that evolved thinking that what's next is we purchased Subnet 48. And what we've been calling quantum on 63 is where we are going to innovate. We are going to continue to challenge quantum miners to figure out new ways of creating, new ways of simulating. And all of that innovation is going to feed into the quantum compute, where it will be operation, right? This is going to be where people are bringing the compute resources, and we're creating the two-sided market. Now, if that's all kind of exciting to you, I said we have to have a quantum company. And so, well, Qubit Tensor Labs was really formed to be able to experiment with all of this in a very safe way where, I'm potentially, exposed to the crypto world, but my quantum company is not. But what we're actually going to announce here is that we've formed a partnership to launch Open Quantum, and we're targeting the fall of this year to open this. And Open Quantum will be a marketplace where we have quantum users on one side out there executing circuits, submitting them to validators who hand them off to miners, and the miners execute those circuits and return the jobs, going completely into the organics. And the cool thing is that before announcing it, we did already enter into commercial agreements to access QPUs, so we've got the supply. And we've entered into commercial agreements with one of the really cool and most innovative quantum developer ecosystems to provide the demand. And so when we launch Open Quantum on day one, we will have one of the biggest quantum communities feeding circuits into this open market right away. And so, yeah, we think the future is quantum. We think now that the future is decentralized. It took us, a little bit of experimentation to figure that out. And what we're maybe most excited about is that we think that the future is bit tensor. So mic drop. I guess I'm done.
Wow, I think the crowd is very excited for that update. So I want to just hone in a little bit on the technology, and how are you going to, Crux wants this question more than me probably. How are you verifying the organics? Like, you're using real quantum computers to do like spot checks on the occasional quantum organic problem. Is that right?
Yeah. So when we get into the organic phase, there's sort of two things that I want to call out. So the first is that when you're developing a quantum algorithm, you're using simulators and you're using quantum computers. And with the simulators, you're very often wanting like the perfect answer. Like you want it to be executed in the way that mathematically it should be executed. Like if you drew it on a whiteboard, you would come up with the right answer. And so when it comes to simulators, those are going to be validated using this proof of compute technology that we're inventing on 63 as 63 is operating with all of these synthetic circuits. And that works by, so the current version of that works by injecting a very small fingerprint into the quantum circuit that's essentially undetectable, manifests itself in the results. We then pull that fingerprint out, verify the fingerprint, and then take those results out of the results and hand them back to the user. So the idea being that if somebody were to, say, hey, I executed it, but they return you random results, you would know that they were lying to you. On the flip side, on on the flip side, we don't know what the final answer is. We only know what the fingerprint is supposed to be. And so that's sort of that approach. Now, on the physical
Wait,
quantum computer,
wait.
please,
So one of the greatest things about having you here on BitTensor is because when I was in university, my perspective, I did mathematics. My thinking was always that physicists were the smartest at uni, and you guys live up to that. So you're bringing unique ideas to our ecosystem. So tell me about this fingerprint idea, because this is valuable to other verification systems on BitTensor. So you funnel an organic to a computer, black box computer, and you've put some sort of, you've called it a fingerprint inside of the problem, and then you're able to withdraw that fingerprint and then give them the answer. Say more.
Yeah. Okay. So, and part of the fun of this is that there's sort of like different ways to do security. Like you could just try to do security by obscurity and insert something that you think is kind of hard to detect. But one of the really great things about BitTensor is that like you have to open source it, right? Like validators are going to be running it, so it's got to actually be like a very good fingerprinting. But the current manifestation of this essentially assumes that we increase the computational load that's required by a couple of qubits. We use those couple of qubits to encode our own information in, but we understand exactly the impact that that's going to have on the output. So then you can detect that fingerprint actually occurred because the execution actually happened, regardless of the final output. And I will say this is our current hypothesis about how this works, because the reason we're not moving forward with it immediately is because this market, as smart as this market is at innovating in the way you want them to, they're equally smart at innovating in ways you don't want them to. And
Yes.
so we're trying to make sure that we have that really bomb. Now, Will, you can feel free to share a little bit more if you feel appropriate. Otherwise, I'd also be very happy to, abstain if you feel like it would be better to hold it for the future.
Sure. Well, I mean, I will say, I mean, you've got like 90% of it, and but I will say just one little bit is that this sort of fingerprinting idea, we love building on work that's already been done, and this fingerprinting idea is sort of just I don't want to say just, it's kind of a recasting of the whole concept of quantum error correction and quantum error detection, because that's kind of the preeminent goal of what both of those schemes do. They want to say, is there a way that I can figure out what's happening in the circuit in a way that doesn't sort of harm whatever else is also going on in the circuit while it's running? And so the challenge is the challenge with all of these kind of error correction, error mitigation schemes is that you don't want to increase the computational load too much, and that's part of the theory that we're working on right now.
Yes, absolutely. That seems like the kernel of the difficulty of the problem. Like, yeah, how do you change the original problem, but you still get the output correct, and yet there's a fingerprint at the end? It sounds like something that can be solved in quantum mechanics, but not in classical computing. Because to me, from my classical computer brain, that just sounds impossible. But I actually will leave it to you guys entirely, and I don't think we need to dive too much farther there. Stefan, is the answer for organics and synthetics up to your standard?
I think I'll need to see the white paper on it, boys, to be completely honest. It's a really compelling line of thought, but I'd have to sit there from Thursday until Monday to really think about that answer. It seems like you guys have you seem to have a line of sight on something kind of sacred to BitTensor, and I'd have to really sit on it to think about it a little bit more there.
I actually had another. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
please. Well, I was going to say, so in addition to fingerprinting, as we move towards releasing that capability, we also have the intention of continuing to insert synthetics into the queue. So the key idea being, we want to validate every single circuit so that we don't have a terrible user experience where somebody, just goes and simulates every other and then returns garbage for some of them, but we're also sort of going to have a heartbeat that inserts data where we do know the answer to make sure that the entire thing is correct also. So, sort of having like a multi-layer QC process.
This is a unique encoding opportunity for quantum that's not really available in other domains. Would you say that's true?
I would say that that's the best initial hypothesis. Yeah, that you very much are using, like Will said, essentially quantum error correction. Here, which really may not be applicable. Though you may be able to zoom out and sort of ask if there's some analogy that could potentially be used.
I find it as both a relief and very encouraging that it took quantum computers to come up with the solution to organics, because it's really tricky.
Totally. Now, one of the things that I said, though, was that for simulators, the end user wants the right answer. And so we want to make sure that it's been faithfully executed using all of the laws of quantum mechanics. For real quantum computers, the current state of the market is that people don't actually, well, I mean, we would kill to get the right answer, but that's not what we're expecting from real quantum computers. Like we said in the early slides, they have very high error rates. It's very hard to get them right. And so what people are doing when they're submitting a job to a quantum computer is they actually want the exact wrong answer that the quantum computer is giving them. So you essentially, if you're trying to build out an algorithm, you do want to know how, in principle, it could work when quantum computers are good enough, but then you also want to know, like, how does it actually work for quantum computers today? And then you want to start applying error mitigation and error correction and see how the quantum computer does as you add those layers, so you can sort of say, how much can I juice out of this thing in its current state? And so while the simulators will have the fingerprinting, the QPUs actually will just get the job exactly as it's submitted. And before handing the response back out, we will have a closed loop verification with the platform. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It's very interesting inverse there, that you got the correct wrong answer, the
Right.
exact. So the progress so far. So you've pushed up the number of qubits to, what was it, 26, 27?
27, I
And
believe.
27.
That's right.
And this is by solving these peak circuits. And when it comes to simulating that particular type of circuit, you said that it's like a really interesting one. There's a lot of entanglement, and so you know that, like, the optimizations that are being done by the miners on the subnet, like, are in fact like useful general solutions or general optimizations to simulations in quantum. That's part of the idea here, correct?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. Now there is, so you can take sort of the, that's, in fact, let me just say, that's a great way of thinking of it. So essentially the hardness that we're encoding into the peaked circuits, it is so complex that essentially, unless there's something that, hasn't been discovered yet, there's really not a way to do those and cheat. Like you can't be that smart because they are entangled so widely. I mean, never say never, but like those should be very, very hard to scale. If you look at the other, Will said when he was presenting that these are not necessarily representative of real quantum circuits, because real quantum problems actually tend to be a lot more sparse and like have entanglement, but not that hard and not that complex of entanglement. And so if we take a look at like HSTAB, that's sort of on this other side of the spectrum, where it's like, hey, if you can be really smart about analyzing this circuit, then you can make changes up front that allow you to simulate the thing really easily. Now, real quantum circuits sort of exist in between, where if you've learned these things, and if our mining community continues to educate, and if intelligence is sort of incentivized and decentralized, and we've got new thinking coming in because they can compete and take over from old thinking, that's going to essentially allow people to start to inspect quantum circuits as they come in, decide how they should simulate it, decide if they should pre-process it, and then potentially do a far better job by just having thousands of really smart people from totally adjacent fields working on these problems instead of, like you say, physicists are smart, but like physicists also have been taught very specifically exactly how they should be doing things, right? And, don't necessarily take the same scrappy mentality that, non-physicists take.
That's a really interesting point. So what you're saying is the peak circuits are kind of like, I don't know, the worst case scenario, right? They're like the fully connected graphs or fully interacting systems where there's just no terms that you can brush under the carpet and ignore. So you're saying by preparing the network to handle peak circuit scenarios, which is like maximally entangled, maximally difficult wave function interconnections, the miners are presumably better positioned to handle real requests, which are, empirically speaking, these are much less complex requests than sort of peak circuits. Would that be a fair summary?
That is a very good summary. Now, it also, like, I will maybe add a little bit of detail to your answer to that because essentially for a circuit of different nature, like for a circuit that is not as complex as these peaked circuits that we're generating, you may want to choose a completely different way to simulate them. So what Will had talked about NPS simulators. He had talked about tensor network simulators. The way that people are simulating these peaked circuits today are using something called a state vector simulator. So a state vector simulator, it doesn't get to benefit from any of the awesome data structures that Will was talking about. And instead, it uses like exponentially increasing memory to represent all possible quantum states with like zero approximation, essentially. Like it just calculates exactly what every quantum state should be. And so it's like a really inefficient way to simulate, but it's necessary for like sufficiently complicated problems where you can't afford to lose any of the information. So I think that it does represent one side of the spectrum, but we need to have, and this is why, again, one of the like many reasons, like if anybody, by the way, if anybody walks away from this being like, oh, 63 is not valuable anymore, like, you're missing the point totally, because 63 is where all the innovation comes that feeds into 48 in the execution environment. But miners are going to have to learn, when should I use state vector, and when instead is the circuit actually less complicated, and when should it when should it be run using an MPS simulator? And if I'm using an MPS simulator, I'm going to have all these different configuration parameters about like how much accuracy I'm willing to lose to the compression. So figuring out how to calibrate that, right?
Yeah, and I'll add on. Sorry, Bob.
No, please, Will, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll add on to this because this is a great illustration of sort of what we mean when we say that that sort of classical computing is sort of butting up against the edge of sort of what's possible, right? The difference between state vector simulators and MPS simulators, and say like Tableau simulators for Clifford, stabilizer circuits. So this is a great example of where algorithmic improvements are really what are needed for like specific kinds of problems. So like someone who's really clever and wants to do the best in every single situation will basically have to be able to both run a good simulation, but also analyze the circuit that they're supposed to run in the first place and try to pick and choose whichever different strategy is best. And there's a huge diversity in terms of sort of what the data structures are like and sort of their trade-offs. And what we're really trying to do is build a community that can really figure this out.
This sounds kind of familiar. What it sounds like is what you're saying is the miners are coming up with what I would refer to as expert systems, like heuristics that are dependent on certain circumstances where they can utilize efficiencies and advantages, which sounds a little bit like the early chess engines before AI was AI, where it was really just human encoded results that were just sort of, hard written into the code base. Do you see an opportunity for the miners to use actual AI? I guess I'll leave that intentionally open-ended. I'm not sure what form or shape it would take. But do you see miners being able to use AI to actually learn the right solutions to the sort of optimization problems that are presented within your challenges?
Yeah,
So,
I think that's a very real possibility. There's a lot of there are so many degrees of freedom that I think personally I actually think that AI is this might actually be like a perfect application of AI, right? To be able to do something efficiently and analyze a circuit efficiently without having to do much work in terms of actually like starting a simulation on the circuit and figuring out that this is actually the bad strategy.
and
Right.
Crux, I think you're sort of we should actually like hire you as our chief strategy officer because you're basically laying it out, right? So imagine a world where fast forward, we've made quantum computing resources free to the entire world of users, and because it is free for the entire world of users because of BitTensor, all circuit submissions start to come through this thing. And we've got miners all around the world doing this stuff for scientists that's very hard, that they very often don't have the compute resources to do. And then on top of that, we're leaving a data trail. And that data trail is essentially every single circuit, a fingerprint of that circuit, which type of simulation performed, how that simulation performed, how accurate it was, how fast it was, what type of compute needed to be behind it. If you think about that data set, if you were to try to train sort of an intelligent simulation engine built to handle everything, that would be what you would need.
Sounds about right. So I believe Jake has silently left us. I believe there's other things to do. But I can back up and just ask one big picture question, and then I'm going to take a couple questions from the audience. By the way, Bob, I wouldn't worry about people criticizing your work as useless and limited. I think you've left a pretty big blast radius in the chat here. People are salivating. People are very happy. I think it's a really, really interesting and deep story and something that enriches BitTensor. So congrats, guys. It's been a really good talk. But a question from me is, I guess, so of course, most of the audience recognize that sort of CPUs are, very universal, very powerful, but not as optimized as dedicated hardware like GPUs. So where do QPUs, quantum processing units, fit into that sort of big picture here? Like, how big is the set of problems? How big is the market that quantum processors can really unlock for real use cases here? I believe there's, some people would look at this and say, well, quantum computers solve quantum problems, which is like molecular dynamics problems or molecular science at least. But can you guys speak a little bit more about what the sort of addressable reach is of quantum systems?
Yeah, that's a great point. And so when we started off this presentation, I sort of gave that the story of a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with one of these quantum computer companies. And again, there was this idea of, you want a quantum computer today, I'll sell it to you for a couple tens of millions of dollars. You want a quantum computer when I have 100 logical qubits, I'm not going to give it to you. So that's sort of because that 100 logical qubit level is the level that starts to unlock, the first about $10 billion problems. And so they don't do that today. We're not solving billion-dollar problems with quantum computers today. The problems that we are solving with quantum computers today are largely experiments. But there are hundreds of thousands of people out there trying to get access to these things. There are also a lot of companies, who have sort of seen the giant size of the prize and are making investments in quantum computing. And a lot of times, again, what they're doing is they have these two paths. One path is to say, let's start building out our IP portfolio around developing algorithms that solve our use cases, and we prove those out with simulators. And then at the same time, let's understand the resources that are going to be required. How good does a quantum computer have to be? And then let's test how good we can push a quantum computer to be today. The quantum computers that are out there, make no mistake about it, they're not solving real industrial use cases today. But the potential is so high and the trajectory is so hot that they are still one of the most expensive and scarcest resources on the planet.
Aside from cracking Shor's algorithm, can you give a concrete example of something that sort of what is your Turing test for quantum computing living up to the hype?
Yeah, so I would say that a lot of the first a lot of the first value is going to be in simulating many body systems. So essentially, like we think, we tend to think that we understand quite a bit, but actually, there's a ton of stuff that we don't understand. Okay, so I'll say this, and then Crux, you can totally just shoot me down, or Will, you can shoot me down too if you if you guys can dispute this. But I was talking, I was at Calgary on a panel yesterday at the IEEE Smart City World Conference just a couple days ago, and this physicist tells me something, and I start Googling it because I don't believe her. She says, "We don't actually understand how magnets work." And I was like, bullshit. Like, we definitely understand how magnets work. Like, we've got to, like, we use them for everything. We totally know how they work. She's like, no, we don't know how they work. And so I'm like, well, like, how have we gotten to where we are? And she says, well, like, we've basically gone and we've looked at every type of material that exists, and we've sort of tested them, and we've understood them and what has what characteristics. But like, if you told me right now that I could synthesize a brand new material, and I needed to synthesize a magnetic material that I didn't already know existed, I couldn't, because I don't understand how that stuff works. And so the first set of problems that quantum computers are going to be solvable is going to be to encode many body systems into these computers so that you can understand essentially how nature works, like for these very small but very important problems, right? Now, Will, I would love your perspective on that, especially if it's different than mine.
Sure. Well, I would guess that there's a bit of hidden complexity in what the person you talked to said about not understanding how magnets work. We have pretty good theories, and they are very good in probably, I would say, like 98% of cases, right? But there is some hidden stuff that's still left to uncover in terms of materials science research, right? And the question is obviously one of scale, but also of kind of exploring the space of like permutations of different materials and kind of the structure that goes into these interesting crystals, or I guess materials in general. This brings to mind the fact that on one hand there's the periodic table of elements. Every item on the table has its own kind of properties, but the space is obviously combinatoric when you try to put different materials together, and then it's made even more complicated by the fact that you can have different sort of physical structures at the microscopic level that each kind of add in their own properties. So what I would say, I guess, in terms of, I don't know, magnets, right, is that there's like a lot that we do understand already, and there's much more to explore still. As far as quantum computers go, right, this is a major use case that people are really looking into. Obviously, quantum computers are still subject to the scaling problem, and it's there's a lot of theory that has been already done, but we really need, this is sort of like a comparable to the interplay between theory and numerics, right? We can use a quantum computer to add in to essentially do like a big numerical simulation, but then the theory will eventually have to catch up and try to understand things from a scientific point of view.
Yeah, and I would also sort of point to this. So this is, again, DARPA's sort of circulating research from, I think it was Los Alamos National Lab, put out the original paper that studied all of these use cases in detail. But you can see in the colored version of it that there are sort of these colored clusters of problems. And so in the early days, if you sort of think about this balance of like quantum computer size and operations, this line kind of represents sort of like the first level of problems that are going to be unlocked. And so again, you can see that those are all sort of in the NMR simulation type range. You start to get into some kind of like Fermi-Hubbard dynamics and phases of magnetic materials and stuff like that. But for the most part, you're not getting into the super juicy stuff until a little bit later, right? Like, I mean, corrosive material, resistant material discovery, rocket fuel, right? These are very like, and then again, you're the red triangle that DARPA's tracking, RSA 2048.
I think in some ways, guys, you've made the work of opening the door to quantum research doubly hard, because the thing that plagues you guys is decoherence. Quantum matter just doesn't want to stay organized for very long. And you've chosen a decentralized system to try and cohere the decoherence. So you've kind of got like a lack of coherence at multiple levels in the system, and it seems like you guys have a plan. It's super interesting. But the last question I'm going to ask you guys about use cases, I think that definitely silence the audience, is every miner in BitTensor right now wants to know how they can use your subnet to mine better. So let's talk about one thing that you mentioned very briefly earlier, which was actually trading and sort of market predictions. Can you just add a little bit more light to like how do you frame that as a quantum computing problem? Where's the advantage with that? How does that surpass AI in its current form?
Yeah. So some of the use cases would be things like, and by the way, most of those, I'm a little bit surprised. It seems like DARPA wasn't that interested in those problems, but I think the original Los Alamos paper did go into some financial use cases too. But those tend to be things like derivative pricing, right? Like basically looking at just a massive number of vastly interconnected dependencies and finding the optimal price, right? So those problems, like those types of optimization problems, are exponentially hard. They're extremely valuable. The quicker you can get to kind of like the ideal price, the more you can, trade at the right price before, while others are sort of mispricing it. And today those calculations are like super time intensive. They're always late. Like, I mean, weeks late sometimes, like behind schedule. And quantum computers, hypothetically, at a big enough scale, would be able to do those types of things very quickly. You can look at really similar types of problems in like the insurance industry and the portfolio optimization industry. Like they all just sort of map very cleanly into some of the quantum algorithms that are out there. Now, I will also say that as you start to explore this space, you'll definitely find that not all quantum problems are created equal. So there are, I would say there are probably somewhere around like 10 really well-known types of problems that quantum is going to solve. And you can map lots of industry problems into those types of problems. But there are very few of them where the entire, world of quantum agrees that there's actually exponential compute advantage by doing them with a quantum computer. Shor's is one of them. So breaking RSA 2048, there's nobody doubts that one is going to be possible at a sufficient scale. Number two is sort of some of the chemical simulations, many body simulations. The world believes that there's, huge advantage to that. When it comes to some of these bigger optimization problems, there are sort of the quantum bulls who think that there's going to be huge speed up with those. And there are also the skeptics who think that, you're going to have best case polynomial speed ups, or worst case, it'll actually be slower to run them on a quantum computer. And so, yeah, you guys still are on the bleeding edge of this. Like, in fact, if you think about like classical computers where we're all very comfortable today, in like the 1950s, a classical computer would take an entire room. It would cost the equivalent of millions of dollars. It would require like a team of scientists and engineers to run the thing. You really couldn't write software for them. I mean, you'd kind of try, but you'd mostly be like working with punch cards and stuff. And they were highly unreliable, and they could only do very specialized tasks. That's kind of where we are with quantum computers. Maybe we're even a little bit ahead of that, where, yeah, they take up rooms, check. Teams of scientists, check. Millions of dollars, check. Kind of hard to program, check. But if you fast forward, right, from the 1950s until now, right, I have more compute power in my pocket than it used to take an entire room. And if we can start to set a sort of, similar trajectory with quantum computers, sincerely, our grandkids will live in the world that, we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, which is nuts.
Awesome. That gets me tingly. That's great. So I guess a final request from me, guys, is please incentivize your miners to share these wonderful innovations that they're making, either through bounties or through forcing them to load it, because this is clearly the secret sauce that's really important for for the industry of quantum computing as well as BitTensor. So I'm going to leave that with you guys, and I'm going to cherry pick a couple questions that I've sequestered from the audience here, and then I think we're going to wrap because it's nearly midnight my time. So first question is from Mew at called in Subnet29. So did you guys calculate? I guess this is a benchmarking question about. It's all well and good to say miners are doing a great job on the 37 qubit synthetic problem in your subnet, but this only really matters, and it's only worthy of hype and respect if you guys have carefully benchmarked what's the baseline here. You know, everyone that works in AI and machine learning is expected to benchmark how good is your model versus what's available over the shelf right now, off the shelf right now. In your case, I guess it's down to you guys to define the metric here that's been proposed is what are the flops that are required to do this using just brute force, stupid, use machine, calculate results versus what your guys are able to produce?
You know, I would say right now, what our miners are doing in that area is pushing the boundaries of brute force. I think that's 37 is doable, pushing the bounds of brute force. Now, you can actually go peaked circuits. I'll kind of point some people at some other maybe money making opportunities. I think it's still open. There was a company called Blue Qubit who had a hackathon where they put out a bunch of peaked circuits and challenged the community to solve them. Now, unlike us, where we're generating lots of peaked circuits, and you can kind of continually win, and the emissions are fairly high, they had a small fixed cash prize and peaked circuits of varying sizes. Those have failed to get beyond this. They've been open since this winter. So, and I mean, like, we've had the likes of IBM employees themselves focused on those types of problems. So I think, I think our people are doing pretty well with it. I don't think that on peaked circuits they have gotten beyond tuning simulators to work really, really well on large clusters of HPC. I do think there's still more innovations to be had there.
So I guess to paraphrase, they've gone from complete brute force to sort of Homo sapien brute force, where they select a smaller region of the phase space that's worthy of being brute forced.
Yeah. So if I were to be like extrapolating from information that the miners have been talking about in the public Discord, they're trying to address peaked circuits by sort of like using multi-GPU, by reducing precision so that they can fit sort of like more into the same number of bytes while still getting the right answer, and just by using the best state-of-the-art GPU. Now, all of those things are awesome. Don't get me wrong. That's like tuning the simulation to work on the environment, which is a very different approach than the approach that they took on the HSTAB. So HSTAB, they innovated so much that, like I say, we have to decommission the circuit now. But we are, I'm not going to share till we verify, but 37 is the highest verified count. We have information trickling in from Valley logs that we may have people going a little bit beyond that, but we haven't yet confirmed how they're doing it.
Okay, so you're
more
optimistic.
to come on that.
Sure, your optimistic trajectory here is they sort of find a signal here to determine where to double down on their efforts, and they sort of steer away from a really naive search over the space to something that's much more targeted. You guys are seeing some initial encouraging results suggesting that they're searching less of the space and are able to deliver results more quickly, but that's still sort of evolving.
Yeah, that's right. And that is, by the way, essentially our theory on how they're doing larger than 37, if that turns out to be verified.
I think it's broadly true for most of research, guys. I think that science is basically brute forcing its way through nature, and eventually we find tricks and shortcuts. But for the most part, it's just running out of stupid, dumb mistakes to search.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just choose one more question from the audience, and then I think we should wrap. This is a question regarding people that seem to be pretty motivated to support you guys. You've put on a clinic, so congrats. People want to know, I guess, you've introduced subnet 48, which is going to be your sort of quantum compute lab. People want to understand a little bit better whether sort of one is the marketplace, one is the inference engine. Could you just disentangle these two a little bit more, just so that everyone understands sort of what they can expect from each of them?
Yeah, that's sounds great. In fact, I'll maybe go even to some slides to help as we kind of talk about that. So when we talked about these subnets, we sort of laid it out like this. Before we did this, we had this important thing. So right now we're incentivizing innovation. We don't want that ever to die. Like we need that innovation to happen, because otherwise, I mean, what's really unique about an open quantum platform? Like, why do people need something like BitTensor for it? You could just, like, anybody could scale up a large subsidized compute warehouse. What we need is the two doing a dance together. And so the idea with the current hypothesis is that 63 continually challenges people to invent new provocative ways to solve bigger problems more universally, and that technology, as it is being invented, makes its way then into, it essentially graduates into 48 and becomes a backend that the end users can choose to run on there. And so essentially you're building your models on 63, then graduating your model to 48, where it can just be run and call it like a Docker container, essentially, by these operators servicing requests. And so it creates a huge opportunity for us to both incentivize, again, doing smarter things, continuing to push the state of the art of technology and enable that kind of future we were talking about, and also to incentivize operating. As we sort of looked at it, there was really no way to do it other than having two subnets, right? Otherwise, you sort of had to choose which of those things you were incentivizing.
I think that's a pretty
I don't
complete
know if
answer,
that,
guys.
yeah, and I do suspect that this is a brand new idea. I think people, we've thought about this a thousand different ways. I think people will look at this and say, yeah, that probably makes a lot of sense. I know there's going to be a lot of questions about the details. And the truth is that if we've learned anything about BitTensor, it's that you have to be sort of, enter into everything with a plan, and then get ready to get punched in the face. Because you're going to learn that, your plan is going to hit very motivated people working very hard. And so, we do have a solid plan on how we're going to do this. We have a sound model for how it's all going to work. We also imagine that as we start going, we're going to quickly learn and iterate and calibrate this thing to really be a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, and look, that's fully understandable. And I think just as important as a plan is there's precedents that you can learn from as well. Like BitTensor has, I would argue, solved certain market PMF fit problems around how do you feed innovation networks into deployment and hosting networks. So I'm not going to linger on that point. I think that I think, to quote you at the beginning of the call, like, we're not here to all reinvent the wheel over and over again. Tau has funded R&D. Tau has funded the creation of various mechanisms to deliver value from R&D all the way to productionization. So I think it would be prudent to look around and see how other subnets are teaming up to take the raw innovation plays and pipe those into deployment and hosting plays. And yeah, I guess I'd leave it there, guys. You've got a bright journey ahead of you, and I'm gonna call this one a wrap, guys. Thank you for joining us on stage. That was you put on a clinic. It was a really great chat. It's been a while since I've gotten into the details with quantum, so that was super fun for me on a personal note. Any last words from you guys?
No, I just wanted to thank you. If I understand correctly, you've played a strong role in the BitTensor ecosystem for quite some time. And, again, from the outside looking in, I didn't know what I was getting into, but I've been very impressed with what I found when I got here. And while I initially imagined I'd dip a toe in, test the water, and run for my life, I find myself diving in headfirst and swimming with you guys. So thanks for building this beautiful ecosystem, and we look forward to changing the world together.
Yeah, well, I'll extend that thanks to the entire community. It's an awesome bunch of misfits that we've got here, and we're trying to fight the good fight. So that's one for everyone. Thank you guys for tuning in, and Novelty Search is a wrap. Have a good night, everyone.